There we go. Your Excellencies, distinguished panelists, dear friends, it is a pleasure to welcome you all to this meeting of the Secretary General's high-level panel on women's economic empowerment. I'm Ghida Fakhry, and I am delighted to be the moderator for this open consultation, this debate or forum, where we focus on the key issues facing the high-level panel, the HLP, its key objectives and priorities, and some of the concrete actions and recommendations that can help accelerate the pace of economic progress for women. Now, the high-level panel, as many of you know, was announced by the Secretary General just a couple of months ago. Its first formal consultation was held here at the United Nations yesterday. It's a 20-member The 20-member panel was also announced a few days ago. The aim of today's panel discussion, though, will be to set the stage for where we are, what has to be done in the next few months, and what members of the panel feel would be the best way forward, the most efficient way of getting there. And of course, we want to hear from you, members of civil society. We will open the floor to your interventions, thoughts, and recommendations a little later in our session, because we very much value, obviously, the sense that you have of where we are today, where we need to go, and obviously your input as to how things get done. In other words, we will be looking at how we close the economic gender gaps and achieve the 2030 agenda for sustainable development by implementing the SDG 5 on gender equality. I should say SDG 5 becoming fast known here at the United Nations as SDG 5, high five. So here we go, women's empowerment. So very much capturing the momentum and the excitement surrounding women's economic empowerment and advancement. But I should say also that there are considerable structural barriers holding women's economic empowerment back. And it isn't just the women, or the men, I should say, or the older generations of women who, by tradition or culture, feel that there are certain obstacles that are holding them back. But we will look at all these issues in more detail as we move along in this discussion. How do we essentially take this a step further? What does it take? What is required to tear down the walls that block women's economic advancement? And what is good is that women's economic empowerment today is very much center stage in the international agenda. Everyone now agrees it is no longer just a pressing moral and social issue or simply a question of rights, but an economic imperative, a sine qua non condition for the well-being and the prosperity of entire nations. So if half the world's population doesn't achieve its full potential economically, the world economy, as a consequence, will suffer. So this has become an issue of smart economics as much as anything else. And it has been estimated recently that if women in every country were to play an identical role to men, as much as $28 trillion would be added to the global economy by 2025. Can you imagine that? $28 trillion, a staggering figure that should make even the more skeptic among us realize the upside potential of the economic empowerment of women, which has maybe for too long been framed in terms of civil rights, which of course they are, but they are much more than that as well. And according to the Global Gender Gap Report, at the rate things are moving, it would take the world another 118 years to close the economic gap. That may be okay for some. Women are known to be patient. We can wait, although I should say I probably am overstating this. Women's patience is also running out slowly. 118 years to close the economic gap. What this means in a global interlinked economy is that nations closing the gap faster will have an important economic advantage. So it highlights the urgency of closing the gap between nations, but also within nations as a matter of economic prosperity and competitivity. So what is needed is new tangible policy, we will argue here today, not more conventions or platforms. And what is also critical beyond paying lip service is the recognition that the economic empowerment of women is also a national economic security question and should be addressed from that angle. And we will ask our panelists whether they agree with this notion. And of course, I'm not suggesting that the empowerment of women poses a national security risk. It's obviously the lack of it that might. So we are privileged to have with us here today the two co-chairs of the HLP and some of its distinguished members, in addition to the lead author of the first HLP report, which we can all expect next September. We'll be hearing from all of them before widening the discussion to include your questions, thoughts and recommendations, but I do want to ask you to be brief as possible in your remarks and questions to the panelists so we can get through as many statements and interventions as possible. Let's make sure this is an action-oriented discussion, focusing on finding solutions to the problems we face and concrete measures that should be taken by governments, companies, the private sector, the UN system, other institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, or trade union leaders and stakeholders. So we all know the problems, we know the issues. How do we move forward? So let's go straight into our discussion with one of the two co-chairs of the HLP, Luis Guillermo Solis, to my left, the President of Costa Rica since 2014. Before going into politics, President Solis had a long career in academia, starting at the University of Costa Rica in the early 80s as a professor of history and political science before becoming director of the Central American Graduate Program in Political Science. President Solis also held many senior positions within the Costa Rican Foreign Ministry as well. Let me turn to you, President Solis, as co-chair of this high-level panel and as head of state of a country where women do particularly well when it comes to education and educational attainment and political achievement and empowerment. In fact, you succeeded the first woman president of Costa Rica. Why are women in your country and in other developing countries reaching such high levels of education and reaching important leadership positions in government, but still are being held back and not advancing sufficiently when it comes to their participation in economic affairs? What are the main obstacles, but more importantly, how can they be overcome?
Well, thank you very much, Ghida, and good morning to all. I'm really happy to see you, and I thank you for being here. And I only apologize that we have such a small period of time to hear all your recommendations. I hope that this will be an ongoing process, and the next few months, even after this session today, we will be able to get your impressions, your recommendations, your ideas, which we will treasure a lot. And the ways in which we do this, fortunately today we have the technology available, so please do feel that you have the panels open for your ideas. I think that the problem we have in Costa Rica with women is very similar to the problems you have elsewhere. Especially in the more developed nations, in the sense that Costa Rica has achieved a significant amount of human development status. And it's basically discrimination. It has to do with culture. It has to do with patriarchal practices. We have been able to overcome problems for women in education. They participate wholly. We have them participating quite a bit more now in politics. Around 33% of our parliament is composed of women, even when we had expectations that this would be higher because of the laws we enacted. But then when it comes to autonomy in different senses, and particularly in the economic sense, then we start to see the same problems. Women are paid less for equal work. The care system is not well established, so it has become a structural problem. So even if women are capable of working, they can't because we don't have the conditions for them to have their children or other people taken care of, and women in Costa Rica, as it is the case with women throughout the world, are generally in charge of this. They are not owners of the means of production themselves. So the kinds of things we face ought to be overcome from different angles. And clearly this is not only a government problem, but it requires public policies. And this is what we're all interested in, moving forward in that direction.
But where do you begin, President Solis? Because where do you begin? You've identified a set of problems. You talk about the importance of tackling essentially the underlying issue of patriarchal discrimination. And you mentioned that women have done well politically in your country with the introduction of quotas. Would this help in the economic sphere? Is that an approach that the HLP should pursue? And for a country, economically speaking, what is more important, the number of women in government or the number of CEOs? Where should the focus be?
I would say both. We need more women in government and we need more women in CEOs. Clearly, there are a number of things that we are interested in. For example, providing a first job for young women. Young women are by far one of the most discriminated against individuals in the country. So we have and this is very complicated because young people in general, particularly young women, are discriminated against, and so providing a first job, that's one thing. Financial support for them in the banking system, for small entrepreneurs, that's another one. Thirdly, providing services from government so that they can be prepared for some of the businesses that they are going to take over. These kinds of things. I think that providing that first push is always very important. And then the other challenge, and with this I close, is the fact that we are a country that's growing old or older. So in 30 years, Costa Rica is going to look like some of the European countries. And so we have to think of what we're going to do with elderly women and not to put them on top of all the other responsibilities that younger women have. And pensions, and the question of pensions.
Which is another added burden, because the majority of women who are in the caretaker business, unpaid obviously, are women. Yes. So we'll look at how governments can help to actually put together networks and can take the burden off women. But I think that also requires a change in perceptions and mindsets and a sharing of burdens among men and women. But let's turn to the other co-chair of this panel, Simona Scarpaleggia, who's the CEO of IKEA Switzerland. And you just heard Simona, President Solis, talk about finding young women a job, essentially giving them an early push in life. So if governments have a crucial role to play, so do actors and stakeholders within the economy, particularly the private sector, where so many jobs and opportunities are created. You've done lots for women. Obviously, you co-founded and served as president of Valore Day in Italy, which has over 130 corporate members, and Advanced Women in Swiss Business, which has 40 member companies. In addition to serving on boards of the IKEA Foundation in Switzerland, which we know does quite a bit of progressive, socially responsible work for women, with initiatives to identify women-owned suppliers in the supply chain and enhance their opportunities through targets, training, technical support. So is this the way forward? Is affirmative action in the economic sense in the corporate world the way to go? How should women be helped?
Well, first and foremost, I would like to say that you don't need a business case to pursue human rights, and we see women advancement in society and in economy as part of human rights. So when we act as a company in different countries, we keep that in mind, but we also try to apply concrete models and that can be sustainable, that can be replicable, and that can be scaled up. I can give you an example of something that we have done in India that I have also personally followed. It is a very simple model. We partnered, and partnership is also extremely important to have each project rooted in society as well. We partnered with UNDP, and we partnered with local social enterprises, making possible for women in remote and poor villages to start an activity, to be engaged with these social enterprises, and to produce some beautiful textile products that we sell through our sales channel. And if you see, it's a win-win, because we're not doing any charity there. We sell the products. The thing that we, let's say, allow somehow is that the limited the quantities are limited, because the capacity of this company is not big enough to serve a global player as IKEA is. But we sell those products through all our stores in Switzerland and in Austria and in other countries. Mm-hmm. Just to give you some figures, because I think also this is meaningful. When we started the project only in one little village, and then now it's happening in other villages, we engaged 60 women, and now there are 600. And if you do the maths and think that these women impact economically in average 20 people, it's 12,000 people that only that small project is impacting. So what is the rule? The rule should be mean it, do it, and measure it. Because also measuring is super important, because it makes it sustainable and it can indicate what works best and what doesn't work.
These are some of the very interesting and helpful initiatives, obviously, that are undertaken to help women in the developing world, the more marginalized women. You say you're not engaged in charity work. And it is, of course,
with this project,
with these types of projects and initiatives. And as meaningful as they are, some women may look at them as initiatives that help them from a charitable sort of perspective. I wanted to say, in addition to this, and if you can be frank here, how do you incentivize big companies like IKEA, big corporations, to employ more women, especially at the higher paying levels of a corporation in the capitalistic corporate world where, you know, does it really make a difference for corporations to hire a woman CEO? The goal is profits and shareholder value, isn't it? Or is this changing as well? What is being done there to advance women economically?
Well, I can share what was our journey. We started with awareness. Very seriously, we examined what was the situation at IKEA. It was like 10 years ago. And we discovered that there were some biases. I mean, if you have the awareness that there are biases, then you overcome them. And then you need to remove some organizational barriers. And this is also very practically done. Thirdly, you need to share those best practices. IKEA, in various countries and situations, Switzerland in particular, we are very proud to have reached equal pay, or to have reached, my management team is 50-50, and I have women in all different levels of the organization. But it's not enough that we are the only one.
Are there incentives that could be given to other corporations that the HLP can draw on
I
to
think,
help this?
I think the best incentive is companies who employ women are very profitable and very performing. So what's the fear? Sometimes biases are also collective.
Thank you, Simona Scarpaleggia. Turning to another member of our panel, Phumzile Mlambo Nguka, who doesn't need any introduction here at the UN. She's the Undersecretary General and Executive Director of UN Women since 2013. She sits on this panel, having throughout her career worked for the empowerment of women, human rights, equality and justice. And she was served as Deputy President of South Africa between 2005-2008, becoming the first woman, in fact, to hold that position. So I'm afraid, in a way, your choices are now limited in that you would only be able to aim for the presidency if you were to go back and play a political role. But which is a good aim to have. It's a good aim to have. But speaking here as head of UN Women, you recently said that if you do nothing else for women, pay them the same amount as their male counterparts, and make it possible for them to rise to the top in senior management positions, and have a strategy to make this happen. What is the strategy, in your view, and the key priority that the HLP should focus on moving forward?
Thank you so much for the introduction and for the potential promotion. Firstly, I do want to thank the panelists and the co-chairs for agreeing to help us in this manner, in this panel that the Secretary General has established. This is to try to make sure that we implement the Sustainable Development Goals in a manner that has a direct impact on women. This panel has been given the responsibility to canvass and to bring together leadership and commitment at the highest level so that leaders can really put actual activity behind the commitments that would make, the commitments that would make a difference in women's economic well-being. This panel has also been asked to select key priorities that are strategic for accelerating women's economic empowerment, and to continuously discuss and talk to constituencies like yourself so that through you, this panel is able to move faster and get directly to the message. But because this panel does not have a long life, it is just about a year, it has to be selective and take the most strategic initiatives. What this panel will not do can be done as an ongoing activity. It will probably just highlight, but there will be chunk of work which should be for implementation. So in that way, this panel is not going to produce new data. It will try to use the data that is already existing, and we've got lots of unimplemented good ideas that can be scaled up, that have not been scaled up. It will look for those ideas so that it can be, in a way, in a position to fast-track the impacts that it can make. This impact has a secretariat that will assist it, and we have the lead author of the report here, Laura, sitting next to me, and of course the co-chairs. The panelists are there. If I can respectfully ask them to wave their hands there. Some of the panelists who are here with us today, who will be high five, please, if you believe in gold 5. And of course, it is expected that these panelists will benefit, for instance, from the whole UN system and beyond. We do have colleagues here from the UN, from ITC, from ILO, from UNCTAD, etc. They will also be falling behind this panel. I'm hoping that by the time this panel finishes its work, we'll have identified either areas of acceleration, countries that can accelerate, and areas in which women can actually stand up with a greater impact to a large number of women. Thank you.
And as head of the UN agency that is really focused on pushing this agenda forward, in other words, the advancement and economic empowerment of women, when we talk about the need to invest in adolescent girls, and just last week at a meeting you mentioned the importance of putting money in the hands of women, giving them control over their resources. What can you do as a UN agency to advance this notion, especially in the more remote, marginalized communities around the world? What types of partnerships are crucial for this?
Through the work that we will generate from this panel and the ongoing work that we do, some of which we are doing with our program division in UN Women, which is at this point in time very much based on flagship program initiatives that we are undertaking. We are hoping not just UN Women, but UNICEF, UNDP, private sector, civil society. These are going to be our partners. We will work with young women directly themselves, young men as well, to bring them and to give them second chances. There's lots of young people in many of our countries who, for instance, have, been pregnant, fallen out of school, and they've got the rest of their lives ahead of them. This cannot be a sentence that is irredeemable, that we cannot bring them back into the mainstream economy. So we would like to generate ideas that could show how technical and vocational education can bring these women back, and at the same time highlight how we need to respect the rights of these women, their reproductive rights in particular, so that they do not become victims of violation of rights, which then in a way stops them from ever developing in their lives. If girls are already child brides, we want them released back into society so that they can continue with their education. We now are having a concept of early marriage survivors, because it is possible to release those girls. We have seen a chief in Malawi annul marriages of young girls after a law was passed. And as they were released, we were thinking, UN Women, these girls need an unwedding present, and that should be a bursary, so that they can go back to school and get on with their life. We have to think out of the box of how we'll make the lives of the girls and the young women better. But the important thing also is that we must solve the underlying problems that put the girls in that space in the first time, and it has to be in scale, 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 scale.
An extremely complicated picture, certainly very multidimensional. But speaking of young women and the need to engage with them and to think out of the box, I turn to Fiza Farhan, who is CEO of Buksh Foundation, also sits on this high-level panel. Buksh Foundation is based in Pakistan. She's also director of Buksh Energy Private Limited. And Fiza's foundation essentially brings clean energy projects to villages by building an inclusive approach and mobilizing local communities to bring clean energy by introducing solar-powered lanterns to remote villages, often off the energy grid. Tell us a little bit more about how your projects are empowering women, especially young women, and how that type of model can be replicated and used by the high-level panel.
Right. So thank you very much. The work that we do in Pakistan is basically based on the belief that there is an economic case and a case of potential for economic and social growth when we empower young women and girls. I've sort of delved on that with my own personal example, breaking stereotypes in a conservative, male-dominated society, and here I am sitting today in front of all of you with all of you. And then we realized that this same principle applies to the rural woman as well, and hence we translated the model of empowerment and economic empowerment to the rural villages. Now, of course, renewable energy is again a very male-dominated sector, whereby I'm usually the only woman in the room. So we decided to choose the same model and replicate it to the villages. And hence we decided to empower women and train them technically and non-technically to become our agents of change in the villages. So today we have approximately more than 300 of these light ladies or energy entrepreneurs around Pakistan that are not only economically sustainable and the livelihoods and running the livelihoods of their families, but they're also providing energy to the entire villages that were earlier in the dark. So that creates women not only in the light of entrepreneurship, but also in the light of an economic and social agent of change. So with my individual sort of role performed within my organizations and to myself, and I think the oath that I had to myself, I feel that as with representation in this high-level panel, in our own individual capacities, all of us will be able to do a lot more positive work for women not only in our own domains and our countries, but women all over the world. By galvanizing the will of the public sector, by including the private sector, and most importantly, as I think from my own example, by changing mindsets at the individual level and working with the men and the women.
And just briefly, do you feel that young adolescent girls are having a say in this discussion, that their voices are being heard? What more needs to be done in order to bring them in?
Oh, they certainly need to be heard much more. And we discussed this in the panel yesterday as well, that the role of academia, the role of media, has also to be brought in focus in the discussions of this high-level panel, because that's where we can involve women counseling, women mentoring at the grassroots level to engage the girls before they become economic agents of women in the world. So we discussed this in the panel. We look forward to achieving it.
Thanks very much, Fiza, and we'll get the public's perspective on this in a couple of moments. But let me now turn to Elizabeth Vasquez, who's a member of the HLP. She is president, CEO, and co-founder of We Connect International, a corporate-led non-profit that helps to empower women business owners to succeed in global markets. We Connect International supports and promotes women-owned businesses in 100 countries by identifying, educating, and certifying women's business enterprises that are at least 51% owned, managed, or controlled by one or more women. And it then connects them with member buyers. One usually hears, Elizabeth, 51-49% equity in terms of foreign capital control of a corporation, not in terms of gender. How does your model in connecting women-owned enterprises with market opportunities, how does it in fact actually work from an incorporation standpoint?
So thank you for the question, and it's really an honor to be a part of this high-level panel because it's very action-oriented. Yes, officially we're producing a report, but it is so much more. It is a call to action. And for me, what I'm most passionate about and what we discussed on the panel yesterday is this issue of asset ownership. Women, we work the land. We don't own the land. We rent the buildings. We don't own the buildings. We really have to think about the fact that we are powerful. We are already powerful. We just have to step into that power. And we have to decide what is it we're going to do with that power to make it a more inclusive, a more sustainable global economy. And so for me, it's working with the various panel members to ensure that while women entrepreneurs aren't the answer to women's economic empowerment, they are one of our best hopes for a shift in wealth and in how we build businesses and in how we employ people. And so there is a call to action. We cannot, as a panel, there's 20 of us. We cannot do this alone. We must be working with all of you. We need to support your efforts, and you need to make sure you support our efforts. So my personal ask for We Connect International is to help us find the women entrepreneurs of the world. Our corporate members spend $1 trillion a year on products and services. They want to spend a lot more of it with women business owners, but they can only do it if we work together to find these women entrepreneurs who want to grow their companies, who want to create jobs for people, who want to innovate. And so I ask you, WeConnectInternational.org, get them to self-register for free. It takes them 10 minutes. And so this is just one example of, I think, how this panel can be leveraged, working with the public sector, the private sector, civil society, the women themselves to have a voice and to act on that. So my one other ask is, as individuals and as leaders of organizations, some of the most important organizations in the world in this space, just buy from women. Leverage your purchasing power and spend it in a way that's going to give true economic empowerment for women and for men and the world that we want of the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Elizabeth. And although this discussion is really all about the high-level panel, I think by listening to some of your own personal, professional experiences here actually can help us draw better on what needs to be done. Let me quickly and very briefly now turn to our final panelist before opening the floor to questions and comments, and that is the HLP report's lead author, Laura Tyson. You can sense how fast I'm attempting to go.
Fine.
Just for the sake of
Absolutely fine.
creating more time for everyone. The first of two reports expected in September. No shortage of UN reports, as you well know, Laura. Right. What will make this one stand out? In other words, can it really produce the kinds of revolutionary ideas and recommendations that we want, or will it essentially play it safe?
So yes, there are many reports. What I feel is very different about this exercise is we have a very committed group of individuals and a very active outreach effort, including today, to try to make sure we identify all of the actions that can be taken, that should be taken, that have demonstrable success. So it's very action-oriented. I really want to say that. We're not going to define economic gender gaps. Everybody in this room knows what they are. They've been well measured. We're not going to measure the costs of economic gender gaps. We might refer to several studies that do that. We all know the costs, and they have been measured. So we have to move to what to do about them. So it's action that is the focus here, and it's action with priorities. We have to think about starting this process with some steps that can be priority areas where we think we can get the biggest effect the fastest, and then that becomes a process of continuing on other measures. I want to say a couple other things about this. We are very committed to having a report which is associated with an ongoing website support and a social networking support, which basically helps us continue to measure what's happening on the priorities we set, to share the lessons of what each member of the panel and others who are contributing to us in terms of their knowledge and experience, what they're actually accomplishing. So measuring success, sharing success. And finally, I'll use a word here that hasn't been used. So this is a mission-oriented, action-oriented partnership, civil society, private sector society, governments. But a key goal of the report, and this is a challenge for the writer, and I want to get all of your help on this, this has to be an inspiring report. We know the facts. We know the arguments. We know many of the things around the world, many of them done by people right in this room that are working. How do we inspire to scale so that we make meaningful progress on taking economic gender gaps, which we know exist and we know are large, and really having demonstrable progress on them. So I want to hear from you about how to do that.
Laura, we will in just a second, but you say it has to be an inspiring report. Does it also have to be a short, concise report?
Oh, yes,
that
of course.
On a limited set of actions?
So from a writer's point of view, the issue is to make it accessible, short, 40 pages. Now, we are going to put online and through our system the repository of every single study that you will help us identify, of every single practice measure that is being taken that people can learn from and measure the success from. Absolutely true. The actual report itself is meant to be no more than 40 pages of some facts, some goals and missions and case studies, and a lot of inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you on this note. What is obviously crucial here for the high-level panel before they set to work is to get your perspectives, your input on how all of this can be achieved. So we open the floor now to your questions. We'd ask you to keep them as brief and direct as possible. Let me first call on Arantxa Gonzalez, who's the Executive Director at International Trade Center, which is a joint UN-WTO agency. And let me ask you, Arantxa, perhaps to address this. As the UN's main interlocutor with the private sector, what are you doing? What can you do to push this forward? What are your thoughts?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Microphone, please.
Given the strong call we heard from you this morning about what we in the International Trade Center, but I think I can speak for a global sentiment when I say that, what we expect out of this report. First is we see this as a concerted effort to anchor in the economy efforts that have been done in the past to address violence against women, political representation of women, education, which we see needs a strong anchor in the economy if they are to be long-lasting. Two, we expect this report to be a game changer. And for that, it has to be operational. So short on blah, blah, and long on how to. I would suggest an important part of this report will be to get the narrative right. And the narrative, as we see it, is a narrative of the economic value of incorporating fully women to our economies. Or rather, if you want to put it in the negative, the cost to our economies, to our societies, of not incorporating women fully into our economies, into our markets. Now, in terms of the specifics, maybe I'll speak to what the International Trade Center knows best, which is supporting women entrepreneurs and supporting them connect to markets, connect to trade. And there I see 4 areas where we would like this report to be game changer. Area number 1 is in terms of indicators that we will use to do data collection and to do analysis. Frankly speaking, when we look at the indicators that have so far been selected within the SDG framework to track the economic empowerment of women, we see them a bit weak. We see them a bit deficient. So please give us the 3 or 4 indicators that we will have to use, all of us, to see whether or not we are putting more women in the economy. 2, it would be about looking into the markets. There is 2 big markets that we are not tapping into. One is called public procurement, 15 trillion market a year, served by only 1% by women entrepreneurs. So public procurement, what is the game changer to make sure that countries not only pass laws that make sure their procurement is more inclusive, but also that these laws are put into practice. And we have a number of examples represented in the panel. Corporate procurement is the other big market that needs to be looked into, making our value chain a bit more inclusive.
I think we'll have to leave it there, Arantxa Gonzalez, but thank you very much for these ideas, and we'll ask, obviously, the panelists to address them in their concluding remarks once we've heard from more of the delegates here today. And let me please ask you to also perhaps put up your flag or your nameplate if you do want to take the floor. I do need... And there is, yes, the UN Women, I just need to say, is hosting an online consultation at empowerwomen.org, and there's a Twitter hashtag on your nameplates at Empower Women, hashtag Empower Women. So if you do want to take the floor, please let us know. I will get to you in just a moment, but let me just go now to Geraldine Jocelyn Fraser-Moleketi, who's a Special Envoy on Gender of the African Development Bank. Not sure where she is. There you are. Can you please address this idea, if you can, in your brief remarks of what your development bank is actually doing for African women, who we know are among the poorest and obviously live in some of the countries that have always been looked at as the least developing countries in the world. So what can your organization do, and what are you looking from the HLP to achieve in conjunction with you?
Good morning and congratulations to the panel. Expectations are high, and we expect audaciousness and nothing less. I don't think that it is an option to consider to go lower than what's required. As the African Development Bank, we will contribute to transforming Africa's agenda and seeing women as a part of the inclusive growth story. We can't do it alone, however. And in so doing, it's heartening to hear that we're going to deal with the issue of discrimination and attitudes. Because for us to take the affirmative action agenda for African women and through a financing facility, We need to ensure, and we're working on this, that women have access to finance, and the access to finance should not have filters. And we need you as the panel to assist us to do away with the filters. The second issue is that there should be no economic area that is seen as one that's non-traditional for women. And we are mainstreaming gender across the operations of the bank, and we need the private sector and the public sector to have the boldness to match us in taking it forward. So simply to say that the high fives should also have women lighting up Africa, feeding Africa, integrating Africa, industrializing Africa, and improving the quality of lives of all Africans. Thank you.
Thank you. You raised the key issue of not leaving Africa behind, the need to focus on all these issues, and the panelists are taking note. Moving on to Yasmin Darwish, who is the president of the Business and Professional Women International Association. I wonder what you can tell us in a word or two about what women who you represent want to hear, want to see done by this panel.
Okay. Thank you very much. Since 1930, BPW International is working in empowering women, mainly with three initiatives as Equal Pay Day, Women on Boards, and government and corporate procurement policies and financial inclusions. We are actively working with our partners as ITC, We Connect, Global Compact, UN Women, and with WEBs. As a best practice of example of how we can do the things in the correct way, we have our BPW Germany members that they got last year 1 million euros from their government to implement the Equal Pay Day campaign in the country. And this year, they didn't receive the million, they received 1.5 million. That means that when we are doing the things in the right way, and when we are pushing, lobbying with a high-level advocacy with our governments and with the private sector, we can get whatever we want. But we need a united volunteers to work in the actions. I would like to ask all of you to think that outside of this building, there are billions of women waiting for our actions. They don't want really to hear more statistics. They don't want to hear more words. We really need to unite our efforts to do something. It's time to action. Thank you.
Time. Yeah. The time for action is now. Frida Miriklis, co-chair of the Commonwealth Business Women's Network. I know that the women your organization also represents throughout the world will also be looking at urgent action, not more words from this high-level panel.
Women's Network is the only accredited organisation that is focused on women's economic empowerment and that indeed is recognised by the 53 governments of the Commonwealth across 5 continents. Now, we've spent a lot of time speaking to women in business, speaking to women in government, private sector across those 5 continents, and for us, the way to make women's economic empowerment real and enduring is simply to focus on the 3 T's: trade, talent, and training. And in the case of trade, we have established the very first multilateral trade missions where we are taking women from several countries to a single country, and we delivered on that last week to Sri Lanka. Next stop, South Africa. All of this enables outcomes that are impactful, that are measurable, and that are scalable. And we offer the HLP partnership and we offer good methodology. So we need to realise the multiplier effect. We stand here as your partners ready to deliver. Thank you.
So not a shortage of partners here today, so that's a very encouraging start, I think, to the work of the HLP. Moving on to Josie Ntabahungu from CARE International. Josie is based in Burundi. How do you make women's economic empowerment real for women in your region?
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. CARE International core recommendation to the high-level panel is to invest in financial inclusion for women, supporting them to organize and serve together into serving groups, to invest in each other and their families and grow their own businesses. We call for women worldwide to be supported to save, get financial education, be included into formal financial system as everyone. To realize financial inclusion for everyone, it's critical that government, civil society, and private sector, especially banks, work together to provide responsible financial products and services. Women must be seen and helped to be included as profitable core business and not be seen as vulnerable people. Having done savings group at CARE International for 25 years, we have seen many women increasing their leadership, coming out of poverty, bringing up their families through the economic empowerment they got. Let me give you an example of Goreti Nyabenda, one of the women living in the north of Burundi. Before she joined a saving group, she has never touched the equivalent of 50 cents of US dollars in her hands. But through being part of serving group, she has been able to put 5 children at school, renovate her house, and grown her self-esteem to become a community leader. Let's help those kind of Goretis worldwide. Their development is worldwide development. Thank you very much.
Simonat, thank you so much for this. We have a quick question or intervention, very brief, please, if you would.
Asfour, I am Vice President for Business and Fresh Women International and the Chair for the COMESA Business Council. I think the whole holistic approach of combining the governments, the civil society and business organizations and private sector is mandatory. We have to look at the whole women, even at the grassroots, at the rural area. We need to set up actually business development centers to help the women to start their own businesses and to have incubators so that these businesses, we have to mentor them in order that they grow. We have to link these business incubators and the women with scientific institutes which can help them to have product developments. We need to link up actually with governments to advocate for government procurement and corporate procurement policies.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. And I think there's a quick intervention by a man in the back. So let's have that, please, and let's add it to our perspectives here. But very, very briefly, if you wouldn't mind.
Good morning. I'm Archana Bhatnagar from India, an entrepreneur and president of MAVE, the Madhya Pradesh Association of Women Entrepreneurs, working for economic empowerment of women for the last 16 years. We are only keen to share the best practices that the Indian government has in place with respect to women economic empowerment, skill development, and reservations for MSMEs in the public procurement policies. If MAVE could be given an opportunity to reach out to the empowered panel, we would be grateful.
Thank you very much. Alison Julian of the National Domestic Workers Alliance is here. I'd like to hear her thoughts on this.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Allison Julian. I have been a nanny here in New York for over 20 years. I'm a third-generation domestic worker. I'm a leader of the National Domestic Worker Alliance and the International Domestic Worker Federation, which represents over 500,000 domestic workers in 44 countries around the world. I am part of Global Union's delegations of 160 women at the UN CSW60, representing 70 million women workers around the world. And we call for decent work and to represent our right to organize and collective bargaining. Today, 60% of countries deny or restrict domestic workers' collective bargaining. In the U.S., workers are excluded from the right to form unions. Restrictions on the right to collective bargain has profound impact on women's ability to move from poverty and to negotiate for a living wage and access social protection. Even with more than 67 million domestic workers worldwide, the way both paid and unpaid care is undervalued is a major structural barrier for the women's economic empowerment. Domestic work is the work that makes all other work possible. And without someone taking care of our homes, our children, aging parents, people will not be able to go to do their jobs.
Alison, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you very much for sharing that perspective with us. I want to quickly move. We haven't got very much time. The security guards are making their way through. So let's quickly go to Myrna Cunningham, the president of Center for Autonomy and Development of Indigenous Peoples, and your very quick thoughts on this debate.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I'd like to congratulate the panel and ask that your report be inclusive and reflect the diversity of women. Secondly, we'd like to ask that the innovative experiences of the work done by indigenous women, which combine practical experience with traditional issues, and they are sui generis, we ask that these also be reflected. These experiences come from our territories, our histories, enhance our communities and our links with nature. Thirdly, I believe that the report must meet the challenges we are faced with, and in order to get more thoroughly into this for indigenous women, we invite the panel at the next session in May of the Forum of the Indigenous People to have you come and join us.
We have to leave it there, though I know that so many of you would have liked to make more interventions, but rest assured that your thoughts will be heard, and you can go to empowerwomen.org and provide your recommendations there and any questions. Let me just very briefly end now with the two co-chairs in 30 seconds or less. You've heard some of the issues, some of the action plans that some of the members of civil society have in mind. What are your next steps moving forward?
Well, I just want to say thank you to all of you for your ideas and for the ones we're going to get. I assure you, this panel is going to be bold, we're going to aim high, and we're going to keep it focused. We can't afford to wait. It is clear that we have to move forward very, very fast. And it's everything that needs to be done in terms of autonomy, how to give more economic autonomy to women. We want to bring women out of informality, as it has been mentioned here, and we have to inspire. I like that idea of Laura. So thank you very much. We hope to fulfill your expectations.
Simona, a tall order, a lot of expectations. How do you make a change happen? How optimistic, how ambitious will you be?
Well, I'm very impressed and excited to get all these inputs. What I heard is to have people in the center, to be concrete and to be practical. And these characteristics are so strong in women, I believe we will make it.
Thank you very much. On this forward-looking note, we thank you all very much for being here, for providing your input, your questions, interventions. Thank you all very much to the very distinguished panelists. And women.org is the place to go for more thoughts, ideas, and information on the debate. Thank you all very much indeed.